Thank you, Kripa, and thank you, Sheila, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to go in a lot of different directions, lots of things to talk about, but maybe let's start with a little bit about your background. You have a very unique multicultural background. Tell us a little bit about your upbringing and some of the formative experiences that got you to running one of the largest asset managers in the world.
Well, it's a lot to put together. I grew up on Staten Island in New York. I had a very multicultural family. My mother was a first-generation Irish-Scottish Brooklynite. My father was an immigrant from India. They met because my maternal grandfather, broke his hip. The patient in the next bed said, I don't think he's here because he cares about your hip. I think he's hitting on your daughter. And he said, that's okay, don't tell my wife. Don't tell my wife really meant, wow, this is going to be hard. Indian guy, blonde, blue-eyed, 60s New York. It wasn't any better than a lot of other places. So I grew up in Staten Island because it was the only place they were allowed to get an apartment together. Wow. And, we brought a crazy family together. We had an incredible Thanksgiving where we had Indian food. We had traditional Thanksgiving. We had it all laid out. We had me at probably 6, 7 years old. My dog had run away, which is no Thanksgiving. Everybody was focused on that. To the extent I ended up with 2 dogs coming in, 2 Irish setters. One was the right one was the wrong one, but both of them worked together to eat the entire Thanksgiving dinner. And so we had the people in from Ireland, the people in from Scotland, the people from India, and we had pizza for Thanksgiving. But we gave a lot of thanks that we were together.
Well, it's a great compromise. It's a great story, but and as you think about the successes that you had over the years and you reflect on what contributed to that, any inspirations, any particular, experiences or anything about your upbringing that come to mind?
Yeah, well, look, I think those experiences really teach you a level of engagement and tolerance that let you work around the world. I was really privileged to grow up in New York, but I spent the majority of my career with Goldman actually overseas. I was in Asia twice. I was in Europe twice. Greg and I, who was speaking earlier, were in London together during the crisis, which was a really interesting time. And he was one of the best partners to work with. And we sat on the firm-wide management committee together. And when I think about that, to try to bring such a diverse group together and to try to work in so many different places with different cultures and different hierarchies and experiences, growing up like that was the best training because, I can roll with it in a lot of places, which is hard for people to do.
Sure. So again, for context, because some people may not know, when you led Goldman, like today we're talking about a $2.5 trillion business. Operating a business at that scale, how did that inform your worldview and what might people be surprised to learn about that experience?
Well, at $2.5 trillion, you start to feel quite distant from what's going on with the investments, right? And I think that's one of the things that you have to constantly become engaged with and ensure you're watching. But I think as people think about asset management, they get extremely quantitative, financial. They're sure that in some chart or somewhere in the numbers is the answer. And I think large or small, you actually find out the answer is the people. If you pick great people, you do well. If you pick great teams, you do well. If you pick companies where management is doing the right things because they have the right mindset and they run things well, you're going to figure out the companies that are worth investing in. And that is true whether you're investing on the equity side, the fixed income side, private, public. So much is about people. And we as humans are always trying to rip people out of it. But at the end of the day, they come right back. It's a real pain in the neck, actually.
Life would be so easy if not for the people.
Yeah, but for the people.
I know. And what have you found, again, in that experience, identifying good people, managing, leading good people? Any lessons learned, anything that's maybe applicable for investors in the room?
Well, look, I think it's really easy to manage people that agree with you. And yet people that complain a lot or people that are difficult, really tough. And many times our predilection or predisposition is to kind of box those people off or decide that they're troublemakers or difficult or so on. I often found putting them in the center of the problem and asking them to fix it was good. First of all, it kept them busy. Stop complaining then, okay? You're in charge. How could we do this better? What's in the realm of the possible? And also tried to turn sometimes people that have a lot to say into doers. And if they can't do that, then you know you have a problem, right?
Yeah.
But otherwise, in many cases, the person that's also a pain is also a canary in the coal mine telling you, hey, something's wrong here. And so you have to be able to get those contrary opinions around a table, especially if you're investing.
Right. And when you were at Goldman, what would you say were some of the biggest challenges that you had to overcome? I mean, particularly in your case, you were running businesses around the world, meeting allocators all over the world. Like, what were some of the biggest challenges that you found in that process?
Well, I think, it's always exciting. It sounds, really glamorous and fun. A lot of it was not very fun, but really engaging and rewarding nonetheless. I think, one of the things is we always have to push ourselves, right? It was interesting at times I would get given new opportunities, but also have them be defined a bit and try to not accept those definitions. To be specific, when I moved from Asia to Europe the first time, I was taking over the EMEA business for asset management. And the ME in the middle is Middle East, so Europe, Middle East, Africa. And I was immediately told, you don't need to worry about the Middle East. Women may not want to go there. 20 reasons I might not want to go, and 3 guys who said they would do it for me. So let's carve the middle of my budding empire out. And I was like, you know what? Actually, I'll go. I mean, half Indian, half Irish, well, a quarter Irish, a quarter Scottish. There's a lot in there. I'm not afraid. And if I go and it's terrible, or there's some issue, I'll come back. And so, people were fairly like, this is going to be really bad. But I did it. I did the tour. I had a baya for Saudi, and I've been going now to Saudi for 15 years. I've met some incredible people there, especially women running some amazing banks and businesses. And the team that had to bring me were terrified. Okay, this is our new boss. This could be a disaster. Will we get any meetings? I knew they were afraid. I said, just see what you can do. And guess what? We got great meetings. You know why? Everybody's like, either she's crazy or brave, but bring her in. Let's see who this nut job is that's willing to come, because no women come and visit us here in all these places, especially, years and years ago. And today you see what Dubai has become. You see some of the efforts for change in that region. And it was actually my minor at Princeton was Near Eastern Studies. So I used to be able to speak Farsi for no good reason, just because that's what you do in college. And so I think we always have to not let people put boundaries on us. You have to try. And it was one of the best things I did. It taught me a lot. It became a great place for us to do business. It also meant I learned a lot and tried to work a lot towards some of the change we need to see in places like that.
And I guess as you're traveling around the world, other than the cultural differences that you're finding, obviously you're speaking to some of the most sophisticated allocators world over. Again, for our audience here, like what were some of the common denominators or maybe the investment philosophies of the most sophisticated allocators that you came across?
Well, it's interesting because if I think about some of the largest pools of capital in the world, some of the largest sovereign wealth funds or pensions, and you look at the leadership, you look at the ones that have been successful, they tend to have an incredible depth to their organization. The people that are in charge generally have grown up in that organization or grown up in similar institutions and been brought in, but incredible amount of experience. I would say that the ones that seem to do the best spend a lot of time getting to know the people they're giving their money to, which makes a lot of sense. And so it can be really hard because finance can be a very transactional business. People want to get deals done. People want to get this. They want to get that. The best allocators of capital that I've seen are like, slow down. Slow down. What have you done? Who are you? How do we get to know you? How do we see you again and again? How do we develop a relationship with you? And if you build those relationships, you can work through some of the hardest things that happen. The normal investment cycle for, say, a fund when I was running GSAM was 7 years. I guarantee somewhere in those 7-year lifespan of a fixed income mandate with a sovereign wealth fund in the Middle East, one of those years we'd do a really bad job. It's guaranteed because it's the markets. You will never get it perfectly right. But having those relationships and having spent that time together, and you can have the trust to say, this will get better, so I'll stick with you. Or on my side, you could say, you know what? We didn't do a good job for you. I'm not sure we will going forward because the circumstances have changed, and here's what I think would be a better investment. And some of my best relationships have been from delivering bad news, but doing it in a way that was honest and saying, well, let's do something else, and here's why.
So the greatest traits are those that take their time, patient, build a relationship. What's the flip side of that coin? What are some of the most common mistakes or the biggest pitfalls you've seen sophisticated investors make?
Well, I would say, it's been really interesting watching, particularly now that I spend more of my time focused on the private side, various programs around the world from sophisticated investors that are direct investing. Some have done it incredibly well. They've built teams. They are practically, private equity shops themselves, or whatever spectrum or part of the private investment sphere they've gone into. But there are a number that behave a little more like that's trophy hunting when they're direct investing. And so it's pretty cool sounding to have put X billion dollars into the latest exciting tech company until you find out you didn't really know the management, it's not really performing as well as you thought, or it's actually an unmitigated disaster at worst. But you didn't put the team in place, you don't have the people, what you have is the capital, and that's about it. There are a lot of people who are happy to come and take your capital, but there aren't a lot of people who are happy to always show you what's going on underneath. And to build that kind of organization is really important. So I'd say direct investing programs are some of the biggest winners and shockers of the large institutional space.
I want to come back to something you said earlier, because it just dawned on me, and we were just chatting about this earlier. Earlier today, we had Greg Lemkow, who runs Michael Dell's family office, MSD Capital as well, was with you at Goldman. We have later Robert Smith on this stage in the last couple of years, Stephen Friedman, John Corzine, Leon Cooperman, all of these legends in the market that kind of started their career at Goldman and were leaders at Goldman. So as you reflect on some of the great leaders you've interacted with, what have you found separated the exceptional leaders from those that were, say, less so?
The exceptional leaders had a confidence to build their teams and to trust teams and to be very comfortable with being challenged. I was always looking for my successor. If I could find my successor, hey, less work for me until it's time. But also it meant that, I could know that things were being handled well in a lot of places around the world where you just can't keep a finger on the pulse of everything. The paranoid leader is one of the scariest things in business and in general. Right? The paranoid leader doesn't get great people around them. There's good paranoia. We always used to say at Goldman, we're super paranoid, but we're also pretty confident. There's some balance in there.
Right.
But leaders who don't like to be challenged or refuse to be challenged or eliminate people that could be a threat or don't put teams around and believe in this sole person is going to solve it. Very few things are built large by a sole person. Big companies have put leaders in place that then put a team around them that are fantastic, better than they are. I always wanted people better than me.
Yeah, it's hard to come by.
I found them.
Well, it's a lower bar for me than it is for you. Let's just put it this way. But would you say, would you answer that question any differently if we were talking about leadership for building a large organization versus leadership for generating returns?
I think actually, both are relatively true, because whether a company is small or large, it's growth you want from most companies, right? The only way you grow is figuring out the leverage points, some of which are people, some of which are technology, et cetera. But it's all about that decision making, especially if you're having a global footprint or multiple divisions, it's going to be a team effort. When it comes to driving returns, there's a decision point. You need leaders, absolutely, who make choices and who evaluate information. But the way that information is gathered is still very manual. It's like here's a funny thing, AI, right? So everything, AI, almost everything gets very buzzy. AI is very buzzy, and machine learning. And so you picture machine learning and you picture maybe 2 or 3 guys in hoodies in Silicon Valley and a great machine that's there learning. And what does it generate? Well, it generates that really annoying thing that you get when you're trying to validate on a website that's like, click all the boxes with a motorcycle. You're like, wow, how did this machine learn what motorcycles are? There's actually about 70,000 people dedicated to labeling photographs and maps and satellite imagery in India. They label the bicycle that drives you nuts. They label the lion. They label the street names. That then gets processed by the great technology that we have. So there's so many things. It's not quite the Wizard of Oz with a guy hidden in the back that's actually running the machine that's supposedly doing all the work. But there's an incredible human touch still in what needs to be done and the way that technology is built out. And it's a global effort. It's a very complicated effort, and recognizing that just tells you the complexity.
Yeah, and so let's turn a little bit to kind of your current iteration or your next chapter. So I'd love to maybe go into why you left Goldman, and then when you left, you joined Eduardo Savern, who was the who was a co-founder of Facebook. Gets much less press, but and he started B Capital. So why'd you leave Goldman? Why'd you join Eduardo? Why'd you get into venture? Maybe you could unpack that for us.
Sure. Well, again, as I said earlier, when you're running a $2.5 trillion asset manager, there are parts of it that are great, but one of the parts that's tough is you do get a little further away from the investing side. One of the trends that I had been seeing really through two big parts of my career, one was when I was still on trading desks and I was spending time in derivatives and in equity markets, and really seeing the sea change that was going on between the public side and the opportunities and returns available in public markets and the developments in private markets and in technology, and questioning how that transition would be made. Then moving into asset management, seeing that transition even more, and realizing that in those same institutions and groups where we're demanding innovation, right? We're the biggest asset manager in the world, in the top 10. We demand that the companies we invest in are becoming more efficient, becoming more innovative, answering questions that will help their businesses grow. And you see the same thing on the private side in venture. But the space that hasn't innovated at all is asset management. Dull, boring, poor users of technology in general, I would say. I mean, there's lots you could counter that with. But in many ways, a very hard industry to move because there's a way we do things. And what really excited me about B Capital and Antler, who's one of the sponsors today, in particular, maybe I'll focus on Antler for a second, is the unique way that they're using data rather than the old models of how people thought about venture investing. And they're using that data to find great founders and find great companies. What was the old model? Well, first of all, it was concentrated again in a few zip codes, not very global, not looking for innovators anywhere from Toronto to Singapore to London, et cetera. And not necessarily very data-driven. So it's the I know a guy model. I know a guy who knows a guy. Get you in this great company. Interesting. There's too many people to know now that way. And, the effort to be very specific. I know a sector. Super deep. We know this. We only know this. It's all we do. There's a value to that. But there's so many things that are interconnected today that you need to figure out a better, more matrixed way to address it. And so some of the work, some of the technology being applied to venture itself is fascinating. There's research on it. I could be really nerdy and boring about it. But at the end of the day, I think one of the great examples or great analogies is from a Journal of Portfolio Management article I read recently on venture and venture portfolio investing that used Moneyball as the analogy. So whether you love investing or not, most people like sports, most people know Moneyball, most people know how technology changed baseball, which was about scouts, and I found him, and I watched him play that, and I know which players are the best, and that was supposed to be a skill, a very special skill of managers and their coaches, scouts, and teams, and then technology come in and be like, well, wait a second. Is it all home runs, or is it actually a different metric that's productivity and so on? That's the same kind of thing that needs to be applied and is being applied in the things I'm involved in figuring out the best founders, the best companies, the best teams in business.
How would you just going back to comparing and contrasting sort of B Capital and Antler, and also just maybe you could comment on, obviously the venture space has seen a very drastic pullback over the last little while. What challenges, opportunities does that create? How do you think about it? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Sure. Well, I find working with Antler and B Capital really synergistic because both global footprints, both a lot of relationships amongst all the people, amongst Eduardo and the other folks that founded B Capital, and Magnus and the other founders at Antler. Different stages in the venture spectrum. Exciting for me because I love meeting founders. I love thinking about companies, thinking about which ones will grow, what ideas will be the best ideas that could change our lives or change the world or help. And as I thought about that spectrum, I've had a few people ask me, "Oh my God, you left Goldman a few years ago. You're doing this, and now ventures have this big pullback." My response is, thank goodness. Thank goodness it has, because valuations are at a better place. Tougher markets make people more willing actually to take risk and found companies and take their idea and say, well, I've lost my job, or my company's not going to pay me as much, or my business is a little less certain than it was. Maybe now is the time to take a really great idea and go for it.
Right.
And so my expectation is over the next few years, we'll see many more innovators that maybe were, just like you saw in finance and everything else, it was pretty comfortable working at Google. Yeah. It was nice. Maybe it's not so nice anymore, and maybe they can take their great idea and leave that comfortable big tech job and start what's new and what's fresh and what's needed.
Yeah, no, it's a great perspective. I mean, I want to go back to the global comment you made earlier. So last night we had the pleasure of having dinner together with you, and also with obviously the founder, CEO of Antler, Magnus Gramlin, who's a wildly impressive individual. Navy SEAL, Harvard, McKinsey, super successful tech entrepreneur, and lives in Norway. And then your other...
lives in Singapore.
I'm sorry, Singapore. Oh, from Norway.
Yeah.
I know he served in Norway. And then obviously Ed Knight, who's from London, who was with you at Goldman, another leader. Anyway, but we had a broad conversation around, global venture capital as opposed to Silicon Valley. So you guys have, with Antler, operations all over the world and are expanding sort of VC, localized VC. If you take a look at like our Canadian landscape, and there's just the Toronto office of Antler that was open, how would the Canadian venture landscape differ from what you might see either in sort of traditional Silicon Valley or in other pockets of the world?
Well, first of all, I think it's super exciting to be here, and we spent time yesterday afternoon with some of the founders, and some folks came to hear some of the new companies that are being built here out of Canada, and I think it's amazing. I think it's underfunded. I think it's smaller than I would expect for the size and the template, the ecosystem that's been given to you here in Canada. You see that changing. You see more funding starting to go to venture, but it's nothing like you'd expect. There's a lot of data, again, you can pull around venture. CB Insights is one of the firms like PitchBook and others that collects it. And I was looking through the state of venture for this quarter and for this year. The country that looks the most like Canada, Singapore. Size-wise, that's incredible. Singapore's like this big, super innovator, but this big. So, a few $1 billion a quarter at most. This last, Q3, less than $1 billion in both countries, in Canada and in Singapore. Declines in the mid-60s of investment in venture in both places. And then you go around the world and you look at those same stats for other places that do not have the resources, to my mind, the talent, and the structures that are so supportive here in Canada. They're only down in the 30s in terms of percent declines that you've seen everywhere pretty much in the world, including, in Europe. They are still getting several $1 billion a quarter, not sub $1 billion. And then you look at the list of companies that have, triumphed or are persevering through this here in Canada. And there are some companies with global prospects, really impressive. Who's investing in them? You actually have Shopify as one of the bigger investors here in Canada. So a company founded out of Canada that's successful and innovative, they're the ones trying to find new innovators. You have some of the large Canadian pensions have venture arms. They're supportive of the ecosystem here. But it's nowhere near the depth and the size that I would expect. And we're really hoping to change that. This year I've been in Canada several times in Vancouver, here. And I would say the quality of innovators, the quality of founders, and the need to get them capital so that these businesses that you're seeing founded in other places, these unicorns that you hear about, and most importantly, these great businesses, they should be coming from here.
Yeah.
And we're excited to be a part of that.
I certainly hope so. We could use a few more Shopifys. By the way, as an aside, as I said, Magnus and Ed are here, and they're going to be during lunch in the Oval Room. I would encourage anybody that's interested in kind of nerding out on venture capital, go meet them. They're phenomenal individuals. I found them fascinating last night. I know we only have time for maybe two more questions, so I'll just jump in. One is, I'm curious, I mean, you've invested across all asset classes, across the spectrum. You met families, institutions, sovereign wealth funds, et cetera. But if you could give one piece of advice to family offices or affluent families who are trying to steward their wealth, especially through this tumultuous time, what would it be?
Look, make sure the people you work with, your team, your advisors, that you have confidence in the people. It's, at the end of the day, this is about building trust and long-term stewardship of capital. And so that stewardship aspect, I think, is incredibly important. I also think that getting that right team in place saves you from being overly simplistic. I think, from what I've seen and what I know of the portfolios here in Canada, and in particular comparing those to the family offices and endeavors I've seen around the world, there's so much potential. And so making sure you exercise that potential, that it's easy, as I think Greg was saying earlier, it's kind of the money sits there and it's in a 60-40 allocation, and that seems safe enough. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but most importantly, you can be a part of some things that really fit with, in many cases, the entrepreneurial nature that generated that wealth in the first place. So coming up with those opportunities is a big part of what teams that work with family offices need to do.
Yeah, no, that's great. I was told to wrap up, but I can't deny you the treatment that I afforded the Prime Minister and the head of the Bank of Canada. So I hope you don't mind if I ask you a couple laser-round questions.
Go for it.
Just to kind of wrap this up. First of all, your go-to workout.
I got kind of into Peloton. So I like Peloton, but now that we can, do a lot outside again, I love being outdoors.
Okay, outdoors. Peloton. Okay, we're going to go with one sentence. Favorite Disney character?
This is a hard one. It's Goofy, but it's Goofy because I had to be in a Disney wedding. So most Disney characters make me shudder because I was the maid of honor. I had to protect the bride. Don't touch the dress, with kids with chocolatey hands and so on. And it was not a marriage destined to last. It wasn't a wedding I wanted to be in. Goofy walked me down the aisle. And Goofy whispered to me, better off with me than that guy. He was right.
All right. Hidden talent most people don't know you have.
I'm an avid fly fishing person.
Ooh.
Been all over the world fly fishing. I was just at the Lower Dean River, steelheading here in Canada. Oof. Man, it's tough.
Jeez, just making a lot of people jealous. One skill you're keen to learn?
Well, I wish I was better at golf, but I don't have high hopes. But I still try.
Again, out of script, but just curious. You have great teeth. Floss, how often?
Well, we smile a lot. They seem great. Yes, I floss every day.
Okay.
And, like a classic American, I actually, from living overseas so long, people would think I was different cultures, from different nationalities. But as soon as I smiled, I had somebody say to me in Italy, oh, no, you're American. Only American have teeth like that.
Yeah.
Only Americans are obsessed with their teeth.
Yeah, with their teeth, yeah. Most annoying celebrity?
That's hard. The Kardashians.
Oh, yeah, I hear that. Does that include Kanye?
I'm over it. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it includes Kanye. Okay. Favorite mantra?
One is be kind, but the other is make sure you're laughing. If I'm working with people that can't make me laugh, if we're getting through trouble, then we're working on hard things together, and all it is misery, you don't keep people with you for very long. And humor, to me, is essential. So, I'll give you one other.
Yeah.
I love a quote from the Dalai Lama, which now I find applicable to venture and a lot of different things in life, which is, if you think something small can't make a difference, sleep a night with a mosquito.
Yeah.
The best ideas are like that. The best investments will just sting you over and over till you pay attention.
Yeah, Sheila, that was phenomenal. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Thank
Visit
you.
us in Toronto.
Thanks.
Thank you. We do have a
Thank you.
special. We do have a little Sheila commissioned art piece.
Thank you.
This
That
is-
looks like my golf game. It's a putter with a meatball.
Yeah,
That's what it feels like.
Should have got goofy in there, but anyway, we've also made a special donation to the cause in your honor.
Thank
so
you so
thank you
much.
very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.